2 years ago, Americans watched in horror as a crisis unfolded at the Kabul airport.
She was tear-gassed and beaten.
Images of thousands desperate to escape Taliban oppression filled our news feeds. More than 80,000 Afghans made it to America. But the story didn't end there.
It was very cold. There was no power, no heat.
Who would help our newest neighbors? I'm Andrea Smartin. In Stranger Becomes Neighbor, you'll hear the stories of some remarkable refugees who left their homes and their dreams behind, only to start over from zero.
Their only possession was 3 blankets.
And you'll meet Americans who stepped up to help them.
You want me to come when you deliver your baby.
What can one person do in the face of an international disaster decades in the making? That's Stranger Becomes Neighbor. Find us at kslpodcast.com. Follow us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else you listen.
You're listening to Project Recovery. It's a podcast about addiction, but more importantly, recovery. We're talking with Sidnee, and she just talked about what brought her to LifeLine and kind of her experience in LifeLine. But now I want to ask you a little bit, how long were you in LifeLine?
So back then, the length of stay was a lot longer. I was there for 14 months, but that was at every level of care. So that was until trial graduate, which is when you're basically out of the program. You just come in and check in once a week. So.
And what were some of the tools and some of the gifts that you received while you were there?
I would say my favorite gift was that I'm a very emotional person, and I before was very closed off and didn't know how to express my emotions. So I think that's a huge reason why I struggled so bad. Something that I learned that I love about myself now is I am very open and I can show my emotions. I'm very good about being vulnerable around people I don't know. And I can healthily, like in a healthy way, express how I feel when I'm feeling it. And I love that.
You know, one thing that I've realized in the recovery world is vulnerability. It's a superpower. I mean,
what do you mean?
If someone's vulnerable to you, that means that they're secure with themselves, they're trusting of others, and it's tough. I mean, I'm still not completely vulnerable, you know, but I'm doing the best I can. But when you find somebody like, I mean, Sidnee just came in and
she's just talking about all this personal
stuff. Yes, and it's so powerful. I mean, it really is. I think it's a superpower, and being truly vulnerable is hard.
Oh, it's really hard. I think life is a challenge. Life is hard, right? And from a very young age, as tender as 12, 13, when we start to have rejection from friends and those sorts of things, we start to build up a wall around ourselves. Everybody does it to some degree. And sometimes that wall can be really isolating. And it isn't until you realize you need to break down that wall and be vulnerable. Another word might be authentic and open. And then you connect with others. But if that wall's up, you can't connect. And if you can't connect, then you feel emotionally isolated. And those are situations where you want to feel. And so you might turn to substances or other behaviors that make you feel, including something like you'd mentioned self-harming is one of the things that a lot of teenagers, when they're emotionally isolated and closed off, end up harming themselves physically in order to feel that pain. And a lot of parents don't understand that if they never knew anyone that did that growing up. But there are a lot of different ways people struggle. So, yeah, being vulnerable is a challenge for all of us, especially if you're in a significant relationship, Casey.
Well, I
like you and me is what I meant.
I'm with you, buddy.
Right.
But you said walls, but we've also heard people say masks, and
sure.
and they're all similar.
Yeah.
Is that something that you're showing?
And it all in the recovery world, it certainly traces back to honesty. Like if you can't be honest, if you can't be honest with yourself, then you can't be honest with others. If you can't do that, then you're going to be stuck in that addiction cycle.
So, Sidnee, you were there for 14 months. You think you got the gift of being vulnerable, and I think that's amazing. What were some of the other things that you did for the 14 months? I mean, I think people want to know what their kids are going to go through.
So we did a lot of credit recovery because me personally and a lot of the other kids that will come through the program are way behind in schools.
School credit,
yeah,
right?
So
Okay.
Yeah, so with
Casey
school,
and I thought that meant something else.
I got
I'm
a
sorry.
693. Woo, credit score.
Yes.
Yeah. Josh is giving,
So school, yeah.
Yeah.
But then the other things that the big thing that you go through is, they break down those walls. They get you to be vulnerable, gain relationships with the therapist and the staff there, so you feel comfortable. Then you just start working. You start doing groups. You start sharing about experiences in your past that you might have shame for, or things that your deepest, darkest secrets that you were never going to tell anyone. Things like that are the reason you're holding yourself back, that you're struggling with.
And once you release those secrets, it's very freeing.
Yes. You feel really light after. You feel really good.
Did you ever have the experience as a teenager thinking in that program, in that setting, where they're really pushing you? I mean, you're making it sound a little easier, I think, than it probably was, right? And, working in a group, a lot of adults have this attitude, but definitely kids, where you feel like nobody else has ever done what I've done. That's the shame, right? Nobody else would ever understand or forgive me. And did you ever have that experience, and then you opened up and talked about it, and it was different than you thought?
Yes. I put off talking in group for a long time.
I
was afraid. I was afraid I was going to be judged, like you were saying, and no one would understand. But after being in group for a couple weeks, you realize that everyone kind of feels the same way, that your peers actually understand. And
do you remember anything specifically that you struggled sharing, and then you realized everyone else did it too?
I remember I was afraid to talk about my attempt. I was ashamed of it, I guess, and it was very personal to me, and I get very emotional about talking about it because it takes me back to how I felt. And so that was something I was afraid of. But there was, lots of other kids that had gone through the similar thing, or even had maybe more of an extreme attempt, or were on their way and their parents just caught them in time before, like they had a plan that they were going to do.
That's the power of sharing.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing that I took away from my time in the recovery world is that the power of sharing that's what made me want to do this podcast, is get these stories out there, let people know that they're not alone, and that these thoughts and these things that they're feeling are not just to them themselves. I mean, there's a lot of people going through the same thing, and if we can talk about it, you won't feel so alone.
Well, and I think and just to hammer that point home a little bit, like, it's not just talking about talking about it allows the connection to be made. And that's what we're after in a program like LifeLine or Pinnacle or any of these, where you can break down your walls, talk about it, and then that connection, there is an energy there. There's a power there to help you feel like I'm not alone, and I'm empowered and motivated to do things differently. Whereas if you feel like you're alone and nobody else understands you, and you would never be accepted or forgiven, then we feel powerless, and it's an awful place to be. It's part of the depressive cycle for people. And so, I know for Casey, who's already an open person, it was, we've talked about lots of times how empowering it was for you, and I'm sure, Sidnee, you felt the same way.
Yes, I did. It felt really good once you do that. And, you do a treatment plan, that's what we call it before. It's basically goals that you set with your staff mentor and your clinician that you're assigned. And once you accomplish those things, you finally get over that fear of what people will think about you, or, the shame and all of that. You get to put into phase up in the program, and there's nothing better than accomplishing the next phase.
So
it
after
really
14 months, it's the next phase. Where does Sidney go from there? How old are you?
So I'm 31.
No, when you graduated.
Oh, when I graduated. I think I was 16, gonna turn 17. Yes. And I struggle. I'm very transparent about this, but I did struggle for a while after I got out of treatment. I went back to my old friends. I didn't take care of myself for a while. And I went through some really hard trials. And then I got pregnant with my son when I was 18. And that's when my life changed for the better. So,
when you came out of the program, did you feel hopeful and optimistic, or were you still struggling with resentment?
I was hopeful and optimistic. I felt great when I first left. I just did all the opposite things of what they taught me and what they told me to do. I was afraid of making new friends.
You're still very young. I mean, I'm 45 and I'm still not doing the right things all the time.
Yeah.
You're getting better.
Better.
Yeah.
But so you come out and you kind of go back to old habits, and then you
Can we talk about what those were? I mean, what were the old habits?
Yeah. So, I mean, I went back to a lot of my old friends that were still, their parents didn't either have the means or just didn't have the ability maybe to get some of their kids help. And so they were still stuck in that depression, still, partying, using, drugs, and living in just basically hell, I think. And I went back to a guy that was my best friend before, and he was still really sad, and moved out. My parents eventually kicked me out of their house because they had done everything they could, and I still reverted back to being my old self.
They
and
had
not
to set their
using-
boundaries.
Yeah.
You were using.
Yes. So I was drinking, I was smoking marijuana, I was smoking cigarettes. I wasn't obeying the rules. Like I wouldn't come home for curfew and things like that.
What
and
about
sneaking
school?
out? Yes, my parents even tried to putting me in a new school, and eventually I just didn't. I ended up dropping out, and moved in with that guy, and for a while there was very, 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 very sad, and then very, very dark again. And I found out I was pregnant and didn't know what to do. But I went to my mom, and she was the most understanding, loving person ever. And I ended up moving back with my parents and cutting out all of the friends that I had. And that's when my life got better.
Went back to the LifeLine playbook.
Yes. Used all the tools, which was talking about how I was really feeling and being transparent with my parents about that. And like I said, cut out all the triggers and bad influences and people that weren't benefiting me. Not that they were bad themselves, but they were stuck in their own
They
stuff.
were struggling too,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So,
And
yeah.
so-
Misery loves company.
Yes.
Well, it's important to understand that your friends, that's the hard thing about those kind of relationships when you're a teenager is I'm sure there were aspects of those relationships that were genuine and good. These were other kids that were inexperienced in life, doing the best that they could in probably tough circumstances, struggling with the development of their own addictions and anger and mental health issues. And I'm sure some of your connection to those kids was authentic and probably supportive in many good ways. But overall, because of all the other things going on, pulled you back into that. So it's not that they're bad people, of course, but the influence that all of you had on each other was counterproductive.
Yes, and I love every single one of them still. I haven't had much contact with majority of them since then, but like you said, they were all just struggling in their own way, and they didn't know how to get out
and
of
I
it
think
either.
that's one of the valuable things about a residential program. I think about how hard it is for parents to make that emotional decision to send your kid to a residential program. But one of the things that it does change is that dynamic that your child is struggling with other kids who are struggling as well. It gets them out of that for several months and puts them in a therapeutic environment. And
Well, many parents don't have the time to monitor that kid 24/7.
Well,
They've got jobs, and
even if you have all the time, like they're younger, they got more energy. If they're hell bent on misbehaving,
if there's a
they're
way,
gonna
they'll
do
find
it.
it.
Yeah, and so at some point, we don't tell kids the following. This is a secret.
Okay, shh.
We can only parent them to the degree they let us, right? So I mean, if that kid wants to go in the front door of the school and out the back door of the school, or in the front door of the house and out the back door of the house, sneak out in the middle of the night, they'll find a way. They'll roll the car out of the driveway. I never did that, of course, and those sorts of things. And we as parents, at some point, usually need to get some help, some backup and support. And I think that's what great programs are able to do. They work with the parents and have that family-oriented atmosphere to try to help reintegrate. And in your case, I can tell, as when you found out you're pregnant, the first thing you said, I could even see a sense of smile and relief on your face was I went and talked to my mom. And even under those difficult situations where parents had asked you to move out, the first person you went to is your mom. So relationship, parents, even under the worst circumstances with your kids, work on building that relationship.
The connection.
The connection, exactly, yeah.
So you find out you're having a son, and you get back to the LifeLine playbook. And you said from there your world changed. Tell me a little bit about that.
I just felt like I had a purpose again. When he was born, it made me feel, I don't know if this is the right word, alive. Like I wanted to be alive. There was a reason to keep fighting every day through my depression and just to do better every day, to try and do better for him. And I was able to, use the skills that I used from LifeLine to like accomplish that and to be a good mom. And yeah.
You sound like an amazing mom.
Thank you.
And he's so lucky to have you. So after he's born, you said you went to work for LifeLine?
Yeah, so I worked as direct care staff for a long time. I just had that connection with LifeLine. It was so important to me.
A lot of us in the recovery world want to give back, and this is a way to stay close and give back, and it sounds like you kind of did that.
Yes, I loved it. It's so rewarding. And
what does a direct care staff do?
So they help run groups. They're the eyes with the kids at all times. So you become connected with the kids. You take care of them in a way. You're the eyes on them to keep them safe. We do have kids that come in that are not going to keep themselves safe. So they watch over the kids and they help run groups, and
you're right there with them all the time, right?
Yes.
Whereas the therapists or the nursing staff are interacting with them occasionally.
Yes.
You're with them all the time.
Yes, 24/7.
A stranger with a gun came upon 2 teens taking pictures under a rising full moon. But violence is only the beginning of this story.
Sometimes I thought, there are no miracles. Yeah, there are. And this is a big one.
I'm Amy Donaldson, and I've spent my career talking about how lives are undone by violence. The Letter is a podcast about how lives are remade. Follow The Letter at theletterpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And since I've been at Pinnacle, there's many times I can go into the house, and I like to see clients 2-3 weeks later, and you can see a bounce in their step, you can see a different color in their face, you can see a twinkle in their eye, and you go, yeah, he's getting it. She's getting it. This is awesome. And you just go, and I feel a little envious at times, because you just go, all right. It's like that morning of
remember
Christmas.
that feeling, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's why a lot of people in recovery go to work in the field, because they want to hold on to that and they want to give back. And somebody was there for you when you needed it. And it just feels good. So you did that for how long?
I did that for about 2.5 years. And then I quit, sadly, because I lived in Draper at the time, which I do now. But at the time, it was hard being a single mom and being away from my son. So I quit. But as of 3 years ago, I came back. It brought me back to LifeLine.
So, when I talk about my recovery, I talk about mindfulness and meditation. Do you guys use skills like that? You say that your program has kind of evolved over the years. What are some of the pillars of your program?
So there's something that's the same as it always has been, is families. Like one of the main things we focus on is bringing families back together, teaching the parents parenting skills and how to raise a kid that is struggling.
We should talk about that for a second, because I think, when I was, and I keep saying that when I was in recovery, because that's the only thing I can base it on. But I remember sitting in that meeting, and I'm going to a therapist twice a week. I'm going to all these meetings, and my therapist looks at my family and goes, you could use therapy too. And they're like, what, us? No, not us. We don't need it. But I can see the parents doing, no, we're fine. It's my kid. We got to fix my kid. But no, you've got to learn how to talk with your kid, learn how to engage and understand. And so I think you guys do that with the parents as well, right?
Yes. Family therapy is huge, and we involve the parents from day one. We don't take kids that parents just drop their kids off and say, okay, fix my kid. We actually will refer them out, because that's just not the program we are. So that's something I love about our program. I think it's so special.
What's an example? Can you put you on the spot, but what can you think of an example of a type of parenting skill that they might work on commonly?
I think that talking to them, like being able to talk instead of talking down to them. And, I think parents, they get fed up and they revert to anger instead of understanding that and how to talk to them and how the kids can talk to their parents. And so that's something they focus on a lot in family therapy, is being able to open up to each other and actually having a real conversation.
Yeah, I see a lot where parents feel like, my teenager doesn't listen to me. No matter what I say, they just won't listen. And the teenager in the same breath is saying, you know what, I try to tell my parents how I feel, and they just won't listen to me.
They don't get it.
There's a lot of that. So at home, there are a lot of people talking at each other instead of communicating back and forth. And I think that's, again, one of those professional skills that we just think, oh, why do I need help with this? But, I mean,
I've been talking my whole life.
Yeah, you're real good at it.
Yeah. But are you a good listener?
That's where there's a difference between talking and communicating, right? And so I think that's one of my favorite things about, residential type programs is giving parents that professional help to realize, how do I communicate with a teenager, right? And a teenager, how do I communicate with my parents?
So we've been talking a little bit about LifeLine and the program and Sidnee's life, and she's been just gracious to share her story with us. But let's talk a little bit. You've said that you've got an IOP, which is an intensive outpatient program. And what is that?
That's after school. So at that point, we do admit into that level of care, so they don't have to come straight into residential. So if they do come in, it's just after school. It's 3 nights a week from 4 to 8 o'clock, Monday, Tuesdays, and Thursday nights. And they get, extra support. Maybe if they're having a hard time making new friends, maybe they had a huge fight with their family, they come and do a group. They also do a lot of activities with them, and they still get that individual sessions with their therapist and family sessions with their therapist as well. It's just helping them give a little bit more support than just once a week outpatient therapy.
I'm going to ask you a question, Matt, because it's primary your clientele is young kids. How old do you have to be to see a therapist?
Well, I mean, there are places in town that specialize in working with preschool children for various reasons. Obviously, you would approach working with really young kids differently, and probably different sorts of reasons bring them in than teenagers. But the truth is, I had an interesting conversation with somebody yesterday with a teenager and his mom, and the conversation kind of went like this: Mom made me come today. I've been doing really good. I don't really need to be here anymore. And he wasn't really angry. He was just kind of being matter of fact. And he and I have been working together for about 6 months, and I agreed. He's improved tremendously on the things he came in to work on. And frankly, his parents have done a good job too, because in the outpatient care I do, there's a lot of parental involvement as well. And we talked about the fact that, it's interesting that we put this medical model. My leg's broke, doc, fix it. I don't go to the doctor unless I have a problem. If I do, I go in, the expert fixes it for me, and then we're good to go. That works great in medicine. In therapy, there may be a little bit of that, right? Like a kid is in distress, I'm very depressed, I need some help. We get them a timeout, they go into the hospital or a residential, and we help them. But our goal should be to bring people up above okay. We're trying to get past okay. Psychology and therapy has the ability to help us go beyond that. So that's why an IOP program is so cool, is because if you're a parent and you're struggling with your teenager, you feel like we're kind of tottering on the edge. Maybe we don't have a lot of substance problems yet. Maybe we won't ever. Maybe we haven't heard about suicide yet. Maybe we won't ever. But things aren't happy. Things aren't clicking. He's unhappy or she's unhappy, and so are we as parents. That's a great time to say, you know what? Let's get in and prevent anything getting worse, and maybe take us up to a higher level, something that's more enjoyable. Because, man, I remember when my kids were little, it was so fun. You're talking about trick-or-treating tonight with your 11-year-old, and that's such a great age to do that at. And then they get to be 15, and you just want to strangle them most of the time, right? And they think they know better than you. And it's like, but that you miss that. I want to connect with my 13-year-old or my 15-year-old or my 17-year-old. And that's a great time to utilize an outpatient therapy situation where you come in and you say, we're not teetering on the edge of disaster, but I feel like we're heading in the wrong direction. Can we improve our communication skills and get back to better relationships? So to answer your question, I know that's a long answer, but to answer your question, I think at any age where parents start to feel like things aren't really going that well, or just to improve skill deficits. Some families are great at communicating. I mean, it's crazy how good they are. But most aren't. Most are not.
Yeah.
There's a lot of love, but the communication isn't what it could be. And so that would be one of the main things is great for a family to work on, or a teenager or preteen, is how do I communicate?
Well, the reason I asked a short question to your long answer was therapy sounds like a good first line of defense.
Yeah, it really is. It's a great place to assess what the problems really are, too. And in fact, it's not uncommon that a parent has a feeling things aren't going well, but there's no real evidence, grades are okay, they're coming home on time. And then you get in there and you find a trusting atmosphere where the teenager wants to open up and say, yeah, Mom, I've been using drugs. Or, I've been shoplifting. I haven't been caught, but I'm feeling angry, or I'm real depressed, whatever it happens to be. And so you can get in and identify problems before they become a crisis.
All right, Sidnee, this is where we end the show, but I want to give you the chance to talk to parents out there whose kids might be struggling. What would you say to them?
I would just say if you need help, even if it is just you're worried about your child and you don't know where to go, we are happy to talk to any parents. Our number is 801-936-4000. We really want to help people. That's why we're in this business. It's not for the money. It's not, to be rich or anything. We're doing it because we want to give back, like you were talking about earlier, and we want to help families.
In LifeLine, you guys have been doing this for 29 years, so you know a thing or two.
Yes. I'd like to think we do.
LifeLine's one of those programs that those of us who work in mental health in town have come to know over time. Like you mentioned, their programs evolved to reflect the evidence-based therapies and things that we know work. And that's a great place for parents to call. A lot of times parents just don't know what to do.
Why not start there?
It's a great place to call in and have a free consult over the phone and get some information. And what I really like about LifeLine and a few other programs in town that do the same thing is they're not afraid to send you off to a different program if that's a better fit. And that, to me, is a sign of a quality program, because there's a lot easier ways to get rich than mental health. I don't really know anybody in mental health that's rich.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's not what that sort of business is about. This is a labor of love sort of business, and it helps a lot of people. And if you have questions as a parent, I highly recommend you call in and talk to Sidnee or one of her colleagues and ask your questions and get some real straight answers.
Obviously, you're doing pretty good. You can afford that lobster shirt.
Well, it has lobsters on it. That's true.
Yeah.
That's different than eating lobster. It's just
what website did you buy that on?
Oh, I don't know, lobster.com probably.
Hey, I want to say thanks to everybody for joining us on the podcast today. I want to say thanks to Sidnee. I know you weren't expecting to get so emotional, but it was so powerful that you did, and you shared your story, and maybe somebody can get some help from that. And if you know somebody who needs some help, have them do what I did and give Pinnacle Recovery Center a call. Project Recovery, it's a KSL podcast.